This is my 1984 Jeep CJ-8 Scrambler, powered by a 1983 Mercedes-Benz turbo diesel OM617. Just kind of walk you through a little bit of this install here. Um, so one of the first things you'll notice is I kept the Mercedes-Benz factory oil cooler. I ended up getting some new hydraulic lines made to mate it up to the Mercedes-Benz factory oil filter housing. I ended up having to make a relocation bracket because on my CJ, even though there's enough clearance against the firewall for the oil filter housing, I couldn't actually lift it up. And since I want to do oil changes, I ended up having to make a new bracket for that. I don't know if you can see down there the plate that mounts to the engine. I ended up using some 8AN fittings as well as stainless steel hoses for that. End up using a factory, I believe that's a GM oil pressure sending unit, because for the factory oil pressure sensor. This is the Mercedes-Benz glow plug relay, and ended up mounting it on the firewall. Let's see. For the power steering, I ended up keeping the Mercedes-Benz factory power steering unit. It's enough for what I'm doing right now. So what I had to do for that is I needed to get a new pressure hose made. And I just ended up running a coupler from the Mercedes-Benz factory return line to the Jeep factory gearbox down there. For the vacuum, I wanted to keep my factory brake booster. In the meantime, I'd like to maybe do a hydro boost in the future. But to help cut costs down, end up using the Mercedes-Benz factory vacuum pump down here to a T-block. One of them goes to my brake booster, as you can see. The other one goes to a normally open air fuel solenoid. What this does is allows me to shut the engine off with the key off, which is something I really wanted to keep. I know a lot of guys run a cable system to the factory throttle to turn that off, which I kept in there. You never know, especially if this thing ever goes out. I'm kind of trying it out here for a while. It seems to be working good in the meantime. For the heater hoses, the nice thing about the inside diameter of the Mercedes-Benz factory heater hoses, especially this one here, is that you could pretty much fit a 5/8 coupler in there. So what I end up running is a 5/8 coupler. I ordered some new factory Mercedes hoses. I end up coupling to 5/8 heater hose, which allowed them to fit perfectly with the factory heater core. As you notice here, I ended up running a changeover valve for the ALDA shutoff. I just wanted to kind of keep it, Mercedes thought it was important to put on there, so I figured it might as well be important to keep on there. So let's see here. I ended up not keeping the Mercedes-Benz factory heater fan. I purchased a 16-inch, I believe ProComp makes it. It's a cheapo electric fan. I'm going to keep it here for a while. It seems to be working really good. I ran that to a adjustable thermostatic switch that you can see over here on the firewall above the starter solenoid. Kind of allowed me to tune that a little bit to turn on when I wanted it to come on. Kind of back to the factory oil cooler. All I ended up doing to make it work is I just used a piece of angle iron, welded some supports on it, and then mounted it to the factory radiator support. Works out great. It's very clean. Heater hoses. These are Gates universal hoses. They have different inlet and outlet sizes. I have more detail about those actual sizes and links and part numbers. I'll put a link here to my build form that I have on that. They work great. Ended up doing a lot of research trying to find the correct links I wanted and the hose IDs that I needed. That should be helpful for anybody doing this swap as well. For the intake, I ended up running a universal K&N cold air intake setup. I wanted to kind of I like the factory setup where it pulls cold air from the radiator support. So I like that, so I ended up keeping it. So what I ended up doing was cutting a hole out for this filter housing to slide in. Ended up running a piece of angle here to support it, using the hose that comes with the kit. To a reducer I also got from K&N. I ended up running a coupler to couple that. Ended up getting a factory GM temperature sending unit for the coolant gauge. That's where that guy is at. There's a vacuum switch here that I ended up removing and just put a plug in there to plug that port up. Okay, onto the turbo. Since I ended up doing a oil filter housing relocation bracket, I ended up needing to make a new turbo oil line. This is, I think it's an AN if I remember correctly. It's either an A or a 6N size. I ended up purchasing a 8 or 6 AN adapter fitting for the turbo. I think it's for a Mitsubishi turbo, but it's the same dimensions, so it ends up working out great. Ran that guy to the oil filter housing back there. Now for the exhaust, I ended up getting a downpipe from Nathan Koch over at Mercedes-Benz 4x4, and he has a kit that's pretty easy to install. You just have to kind of cut it to make it fit what you want it to do, or whatever application you're doing. So I ended up cutting that, welding that in there. Now for the engine supports, this is the passenger side. Ended up getting those from Nathan Koch as well. I mean, they're pretty easy to make, but I figured, I'm trying to cut down on time and fabrication on this build, so these end up working out great. They're just angle pieces of steel with the slots cut out for the factory motor mounts. The very nice thing about this one in particular on my Scrambler build is if you look down here, they line up with the factory motor mount holes. So instead of having to weld it, which a lot of people do, and Nathan actually recommends doing for certain applications, they end up working out great. I figure 6 grade 8 bolts is more than adequate to hold these motor mounts in. I'll kind of go to the front here. One of the major problems and issues with the OM617 is the oil pan. Now the factory oil pan is pretty wide. It comes out to about here, which as you can see runs into the pumpkin here on the front diff. A lot of people kind of notch them in there. I just wanted to keep my, again, like I said, fabrication process I need to do on this build to a minimum. So I ended up ordering Nathan Koch over at Mercedes-Benz 4x4 has a kit that you can do if you wanted to weld it yourself that adapts and kind of you take out the bottom half of the old factory oil pan and TIG weld the new one in. I ended up just getting him to make me my own since I don't really have a TIG welder here and I don't want to take the time to go find one. So as you can see here, it's installed on there. It's a pretty nice oil pan. I think it gives you some added actual oil capacity, which is nice, I guess. So as you can see, I'll go back to here. You can see the clearance with the 1.5 inch offset that's on the engine. I did that because the Jeep factory is about 1.5 inches to 2 inches offset to make way for the front drive shaft. With that in there, as you can see, there's more than enough clearance. I don't think I'm ever going to hit that. Just in case, I ended up just dropping my bump stop down a little bit just to prevent it if I ever do get kind of crazy with it and the axle goes up that far. So again, more than enough. This is a pretty much factory set. It just has a Sacco reversal kit on it, which kind of does, I think it's 1.5 inches lift. I'll kind of come around this side over here. I ended up keeping the Jeep Borgs Warner T5 transmission, which I find is really nice so far. I mean, I'm going to end up running a new process 435 probably to get the proper gearing I want for this engine. Right now, it's more than sufficient. So the only thing you really need to do is I ended up getting an adapter piece again from Nathan Koch. This works for a T176 as well as the T5. which is great. The only thing you'll have to do is the factory clutch return spring. I just ended up running a piece of angle here to adapt it. There's really nothing there to put it back on there. I'm assuming maybe if you have a T176, I can't remember exactly, you may use this hole. I'm not 100% sure, but ended up working out great for me. Ended up running that. That runs to a factory Dana 300, which is nice if you do this swap and you keep that in your factory transmission, is because you don't have to get new drive shafts, which can be a pain in the butt. Eventually I probably will once I do the new process 435. But as you can see, the exhaust, I just ran it straight out. Right now it's just cut off right before the front axles. I'm going to need to get a new tailpipe made for that. But that's pretty much it under the carriage. You can see here's the back side of the factory oil filter. The other nice thing about the adapter plate is you can keep your factory starter, which for my CJ is, I believe, more than adequate. It's a behemoth of a starter. Here's a bottom view of the adapter plates. The driver's side, you can see what I ended up doing was cutting it off here and flipping it around. I was going to keep the original oil cooler lines which run here. So if you want to keep that and you're able to keep it, I would recommend maybe cutting that down and kind of adapting it a little bit for your needs. If you look up, here's the adapter plate I was telling you about that runs to the relocation for the oil filter housing. That's pretty much it. Again, like I said, I'll have a here's my drain for the turbo oil feed line. Like I said, I'll have a link on the bottom of this video that will go to my build I have written up on this. It's extremely much more detailed than this video will be. I'll also have a parts list and price list of everything I purchased on this. Kind of help out a lot of guys who are doing this swap. It took me a while to kind of piece that all together, so hopefully that's really handy for somebody looking to do this. So that's the top part here. I'll kind of take you on a quick little drive here to show you the performance of it. One thing you'll find that's interesting is it's totally different from a factory 258. It's also much more different than an AMC 360 or most gasoline powered cars you're going to come across. Not just because it's a diesel, but because it's a short stroke diesel. So it's pretty happy between 26 and 3,500 RPM, which is unheard of for a Cummins. So the driving habits are a little bit different than what you'll encounter doing that kind of conversion, which a lot of guys do, and I would like to have done it. It's just extremely expensive. So this, all in all, is going to be roughly about $4 grand for the entire swap, which is much cheaper than a Cummins. So back to this. So what I ended up doing is I ran my glow plug relay to turn on the brake light, since I don't really use my e-brake very much. It's not coming on now just because I've been driving this a little bit today and it's pretty warm already. So I'll go ahead and start it. So as you can see, it runs very well. It's quite shaky. I have a pretty rough idle. I think I just need to clean my injectors. So I'll kind of take you on a quick drive of this, show you how it rides. It's my glove box shaking. This is my neighborhood here, so. It drives pretty well. I mean, it's not really the proper gearing that I would recommend for this. Right now I'm running 31s with 410 gears in it. So it'd probably do a little bit better with some higher gearing. to keep it in that high RPM range there. The sweet spot for this motor. Like I said, it drives really well. I'm very impressed. I haven't seen anybody up close actually do this swap here. They're not very popular. The Mercedes 300 TDs and SPs aren't very popular here in Houston, but they are up north, so I know a lot of guys up north do this swap. So I'll kind of do a straightaway here, show you how it's got some power. I mean, when it gets, that turbo spools up, it picks up some power. So as you can see, it's not going to win any races, but it's more than adequate for, you know, most people. It's a great little daily driver, which is what I use it for. But it should make people pretty happy if you do this swap. And again, like I said, it's not a Cummins. It's not supposed to be a Cummins. That's a totally different animal. But this is more than adequate, I feel, for my situation. So, well, I hope this video helps anybody looking at or thinking about doing this swap or has already done it, for some different ideas. And like I said, I'll have a link at the bottom that'll kind of give you a thing to my forum that kind of explains this a lot more in detail. But hope this helps.